Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kirsten Gogan. I'm the co-founder of Terra Praxis. And Terra, of course, means Earth, and Praxis, if you don't know, means putting theory into action. So in a way, you could think of Terra Praxis as like action for the Earth. Now, I have to tell you that I've been working in nuclear energy for about 15 years. And making the environmental, humanitarian case for nuclear energy. And we were not usually invited to very cool conferences like this until recently. And this is a very cool, wonderful conference, and I'm extremely happy to be here with an incredible panel to tell you about why we are here now, what's happening in this space that qualifies us to be in this tech conference. Well, there's a few things happening. There's innovative startups developing breakthrough products that are really being designed to tackle some of our biggest climate and energy challenges. And the timing is right, because increasingly our leaders are recognizing that we need more tools at our disposal to decarbonize not just electricity, but heat and industry and transport. And at the same time, these technologies are getting close enough to commercialization that they're attracting the interest of private investment for the first time. So we're going to turn now to our wonderful panel and hear more about how these themes, how these trends are being realized in practice, and really how these pioneers that you see on the stage next to me are building this future today. So to my left, we have Kiki. Kiki Lauwers, the CEO of Horizon, and Kiki's developing a molten salt reactor in the Netherlands. And then we have Jacob Stedman, CEO of Blijkella, a lead-cooled reactor being developed in Sweden. And then finally, we have Steenberg from 92 Capital that are backing the next generation of nuclear technologies. So let me kick off with you, Kiki. Why don't you tell us initially what's different, what's fundamentally different about your technology compared to traditional nuclear technologies?
Sure. Yes, Kirsty, you started with it basically being 15 years in the nuclear sector, and I think we have to acknowledge that in the past 15 years there has not been a lot of innovation. People at best were trying to keep the existing plants open for a longer time, so that means there's still an immense innovation potential in this industry. And that is what we are trying to unlock by developing modular reactors which are inherently safe, can be constructed in a faster and more scalable way, making them very cost competitive. And what's typical about Horizon is that if you look at Europe, the current nuclear waste stocks that are out there, they can power the continent for more than 40 years. So that's an immense source of sovereign energy that we intend to untap.
Yeah, exactly. So energy security, decarbonization, reliability, affordability, these are all the key themes that we really care about. Jacob, tell us a bit about what makes your technology different.
Yeah, thank you, and great to be here. So just to take a step back, I think nuclear is one of the most conservative industries on the planet. And I'm sure that you guys don't drive around in cars that were built in the 60s using the same methods as they made cars in the 60s. But that's sort of how nuclear has worked, until now at least. So what me and Kiki is trying to do is really challenge, and what we're doing is innovation, as in things that are developed over decades. It's not something that, as you know, came out in the last 6 months. We, for example, use lead as a coolant. That's been around also for like 40, 50 years. So that's also proven at a smaller scale. But what I think we both are trying to do is really taking this industry and pushing them a few decades, closer to today. And there are 3 reasons for us, at least, why we think this matters. The first is that we can build half the price and much faster than today's water-based technology. So typically you use water as a coolant, we use a liquid metal, which you do as well, but we use lead. And I think building faster and building much cheaper is exactly what nuclear needs, because if you ask people, what do you know about nuclear? Everybody says, it takes so long to build and it's never on budget. And that's what we want to fix. Then we also have an excellent safety case. All nuclear is safe, but we have such a good safety case, we believe we can build very close to users. Even in the worst case scenario, the fallout is limited to hundreds of meters, meaning we can build close to a data center, for example, which is something that's going to be very attractive in the market. And we also work with waste. We have a slightly different waste strategy, but we also believe we can fix the problem of waste. That's another of the big challenges that people associate with nuclear. So those are the three reasons why we exist, basically.
Great, thank you. So Mads, nuclear has historically really just been kind of government financed. What's changed? Why is now the right time for private investors to start really paying attention to nuclear energy?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a very relevant question. I mean, we have all the way through had, as you said, government funding, various EU programs and national programs in supporting startups and nuclear vendors. A lot of these programs also kind of demand that you have private capital coming in alongside, so you have the right incentives. But we see a clear lack of private capital before vendors like Horizon and Blöckler have a proof of concept. At the proof of concept stage, there can be a lot of institutional investors, there can be private equity funds, there can be infra funds coming in at that stage. But when you are TL3 and want to go up to TL6, when you have the proof of concept, that's where there's a lack of capital. And that's why we have created a fund whereby we can channel money from institutional investors into that space. And how we do it, we basically do deeper due diligence. We do the due diligence on behalf of the institutional investors. And then you can say as well, we diversify the risk. So rather than just investing in Blöckler and Jacob's company, we might as well invest in another 19 companies. So far, we have 2 companies in our portfolio, and we expect to expand it up to 20. So rather than making a bet in one company and it might fail, then you here can afford quite a few fails, and there should still be a good return on the investment.
Yeah.
So far we had a great reception. Here in Europe, it seems that we are the first nuclear fund actually investing in that pre-proof of concept stage. So that's kind of what we do with roughly half the portfolio. The other half of the portfolio will go into supply chain, both supporting the SMR companies like Horizon and Blöckler, but also supply chain for the existing nuclear. So like the Sizewell C is a huge project in the UK of 38 billion pounds. There is a lot of companies supplying into that, and we will hopefully invest in some of those.
Yeah, that's great. So you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen, the first dedicated nuclear fund in Europe, and I think really could be the start of a very significant trend. There's more than 80 entrepreneurial nuclear startup companies just in the United States alone. So we're seeing a kind of a blossoming of this new tech sector. Of course, what's really critical is that we do see support from politicians and from other stakeholders. Tell us a bit about the kind of leadership that you're seeing in Europe that is creating the right kind of ecosystem that you need to be successful.
Yes, if you see what's happening today, I think nuclear made a 180-degree turn, and almost all countries in Europe are now backing nuclear. Denmark, I think, was one to follow quite recently, and even Germany now on a European level is backing nuclear. In our case, we are active in the Netherlands and France. Our project has been selected in the European SMR Alliance, and today in the Netherlands we are announcing a 10 million grant that we received from the European Just Transition Fund. And I think that's really needed, because if you see what's happening in the US, what's happening in China, they are going blazingly fast. And at the same time, I think in Europe we have reasons to compete. Today, we have 100 active reactors here in Europe. More than half of our clean power comes actually today from nuclear energy. So we have amazing experience, we have wonderful operators, we have a great supply chain, and it's really up to us, I think, here to unlock that potential, but I think it's happening.
That's great. And how close are you to commercial deployment?
Yeah, so in our case, I think we are closer than many people think. In the past year, we did 3 siting studies on sites that already have a nuclear license. We have started licensing in the Netherlands, in France, and in Belgium. We raised over 50 million in public and private capital. We have now 50 people working for us and the partners that we need to get this done. So the target is to make a first molten salt reactor demonstration in 2027, and the first critical reactor we want to start construction in 2030. So that's a clean path to commercialization in the next decade.
So no wonder investors are starting to really pay attention. How about you, Jacob? Tell us about your commercialization timeline.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're pretty similar. We're also starting our first nuclear reactor and start the construction around 29, 30. So it's a similar ambition. And to your point, Kiki, I think many people think that, they look at the nuclear projects and they see that historically all nuclear projects have taken 10 years to build. And then they think, but these guys have some more modern, innovative technology. Surely that means that it's even further ahead. And that's only partially true. Because, as I said before, we believe we can build much faster because we build smaller units that are serially produced in a factory and deployed to site, basically prefab, but for nuclear power plants. Our reactor is 5 meters. We can put it on a truck and ship it to the site. We don't need these giga projects that go on forever and ever and ever. So even though licensing will take slightly longer for newer concepts, but we believe we will actually do the construction much faster than the light water projects using traditional technology that's starting now. So we aim for criticality in the early part of the 30s as well.
Great, and thank you for that. Now, I'm very happy to see there's some questions coming in from the audience. So let's see if we can weave in some of these questions into our responses. So Mads, tell us about what you see as really driving investor confidence right now, and maybe you could speak to some of the changing public attitudes and the innovations in regulatory and licensing that are de-risking the project developments as well.
No, I think it all comes from the basic, the change in the public opinion.
Yeah.
So we see throughout Europe that the most countries are now actually pro-nuclear. That even go for Denmark, where you can say nuclear have been forbidden for decades here, but at least now the population is pro-nuclear, and I think you can see a lot of the parties in Denmark are changing gradually, and it's going in the right direction. Coming to one of the questions that's raised about the regulatory landscape and if it's only really suitable for traditional plants, we have a live example in one of our portfolio companies called Steady Energy from Finland. In Finland, first of all, I think actually it's the country in Europe that's most pro-nuclear. They're also very close to the border to Russia. So clearly there's a strong need for being energy independent. But there the regulators, STUK, have already taken decision. For instance, the free zone around a traditional nuclear plant needs to be 5 kilometers. They have reduced that down to 200 meters. So Steady Energy is actually looking to produce district heating. And the first project will most likely be in Helsinki. So there you can actually now, and with the help of the regulator, facilitate that you can actually have a nuclear plant almost within the city of Helsinki with a new zone regulation. So I think it goes hand in hand, and I must say as well, Trump in the US, he is also pushing the agenda. Of course, he's really tough to the renewable sector, but he's supporting nuclear quite a lot. And also he's stepping up in terms of timeline when you can actually do criticality test in the US, and it's just putting a pressure on Europe and the European regulatory regime to be faster. Of course, we shouldn't go on any compromise, but at least we should step up the speed.
And I think this actually speaks to the larger geopolitical context that we're we're operating in here, which is very much driven now by resilience and energy security, and also the reality of the AI race US and China are engaged in, and fundamental to that is having very large amounts of clean and highly reliable energy available. So Jakob, tell us a bit about your perspective on that.
Yeah, no, Kirsten, I agree. I think that's, the enormous demand for nuclear is driven by a few things, right? One is the climate change that has been around for a long time, but become much more pressing in many people's opinions. Then, of course, energy, as you say, energy security, decoupling from Russian gas, that the continent has been too reliant for a long, long time. That was a big change a few years back. Data centers, for one thing. All in all, world leaders agreed about 2 years ago to build another 600 gigawatt of nuclear power. So that's a tripling of the current fleet in 25 years. So it's the biggest investment in nuclear ever that's taking place. And I think that's obviously great news for nuclear vendors. I think also, and also to address one of the questions here, I think it's also a great time to be a European vendor. Because, 10 years ago, I talked to Swedish utilities and say like, yeah, we were thinking about maybe sourcing technology from China. I think very few European technology vendor or utilities will source from China today. Russia was attractive at one point, it's no longer. I think certain European utilities are now having second thoughts, is the US a reliable trading partner for something that we need to build and maintain for the next 50 years? And personally, I think that's a very unfortunate development, but I think that's clearly what's been discussed in boardrooms in Europe. So I think being a European vendor quite close to commercialization, it's a great time. And also just a comment on the NIMBYism that somebody put up in a question. It's partly true, but it's actually also the reverse. I think there is some NIMBYism before a nuclear power plant is built. But the funny thing is that people that live close to a nuclear power plant, they love it. If you live close to a wind park, you typically hate it. If you live far from wind parks, you love the concept. Nuclear power is sort of the opposite. And why? Well, because of jobs, for one thing.
Well, that's actually a critical point from the Terra Praxis point of view. We're very interested in the opportunity to co-locate advanced reactors with existing industrial facilities, refineries and coal plants and steel plants, or on ships to replace substitute the burning of fossil fuels and supply new energy services with nuclear energy, whether that's heat or power or steam or hydrogen. Is that something that you're also exploring in your business?
Yes, if you look at that market, there is a market that has very few alternatives. So how we
industrial markets.
Yes.
Yeah.
How we look at nuclear is you need a full mix, you need renewables, we will need nuclear energy, but there's a specific segment that has no alternatives. And you see it coming in the maritime industry, you see the data centers now going for it, which I think with the push from the US has been a real game changer, but you will see the industry coming because the energy intensive industry in Europe, they have no alternative. They will need to look at this type of advanced reactors, which can not only provide carbon-free electricity, but also provide industrial heat at the temperature levels that these companies need.
And they can, of course, be sited on the existing sites or at the existing sites within the existing footprints of the sites and don't require new transmission. And so there's really a very interesting opportunity to switch out those energy services. Okay, any more questions? Would you like to comment on the fast reactors?
Yes, yeah. So if you look at maybe a couple of things here, so the largest preconceptions about nuclear and the reservations about nuclear that drive public perception, today these are waste, safety and cost. Those three barriers we can overcome with the solutions that we are developing. These reactors are inherently safe. You cannot have a pressure escalation. This is also why they're ideally suited to be standing next to the industrial facilities. Can be realized very cost competitively because of this, because they don't have active safety systems. And on top of that, we can use existing nuclear waste as a source of energy with the fast reactor that we are developing.
Yeah. So we're working with lots of these very large industrial energy users interested in integrating nuclear into their business critical operations, but they have quite short business cycle. So their decision making, their procurement, we need to be able to see real tangible delivery within, a small number of years. So I want to ask each of you now to give me a bold prediction for what we might expect to see within that 2030 timeframe. Of course, that I wouldn't say short attention span, but that sort of near-term attention span for the investment community is really critical as well. So, Mads, let's start with you.
Yeah. No, it's an important question, and I think the normal evolution would be that, and that's what Vattenfall also announced last week, that rather than going for the fourth generation, the advanced reactor, then go with the existing technology, but in a smaller scale. So what we can call 3.5. So they announced that they will go with the GE Hitachi and with the Rolls-Royce. So that's probably the most tangible step if you look at the global scale. But actually, the portfolio company I mentioned just before, Steady Energy, they plan to have this district heating in Helsinki by 2030. That's also actually light water reactor technology it's no pressure. So it's easier and it's already kind of proven technology. So that's probably the way forward. First the proven in a smaller scale, and then with the advanced before 35, hopefully.
Great, and a lot of that is obviously driven, it's not necessarily a chronological sequence. It's driven by availability of resources and regulatory innovation, and also enabling actions by governments to make sites available, for example, and public opinion. So there's many factors that are really informing this time frame. Jakob, how does that look from your perspective? 2030.
What really needs to happen, I think, in general in nuclear, technology is one thing, but I think financing and permitting processes are immensely important. And luckily, I think in Sweden, the government just passed a new bill that makes financing available. It builds on basically the sort of UK experiences, the Czech Republic experiences, and basically mean as a project developer for the first 5 gigawatts, you have a pathway for both debt funding and also quite attractive terms that makes it possible to secure private capital from equity investors. And I think that's recently been put in place, and I think similar mechanisms will be needed, I think, no matter if you build conventional large-scale technology or modern technology. For critical infrastructure like nuclear, for the next 5-10 years, you will need some sort of state involvement. So that's, I think, is already happening, and that's great. I think regulatory overhaul, maybe not the most sexy topic, but obviously if you want new nuclear built, you need processes that adapt to the times. Some countries have what's called a type approval, meaning that once you approve the technology per se, and every single unit you build is much faster. Other countries still have a way where you need to look at each reactor project as if it was a 10-year project. We aim to build things that takes 2 years from order to basically plugging it in the future. That's still a few years out, but that's the ambition.
Great.
Yeah, I think if you look at 2030, the demand for this type of technology will be huge. It will move from carbon-free energy to really strategic assets that Europe needs to remain competitive. You will see the demands coming from the data centers for compute. You will see the demands coming from the maritime industry. You will see the demands coming from the general industry to manufacture things here that we need. And I think in 2030, we will all wish we started building these solutions a lot sooner.
Wonderful. Well, we've got some more questions here, which is fantastic. And I do think that AI, of course, is not only going to be a big driver for demand in new clean energy, but can actually help accelerate deployment. At TerraPraxis, we've developed an AI for licensing tool, which can radically accelerate the productivity and reduce the timeframes and cost of developing license applications. But I'd love to hear some examples of how you're all using AI in your work to accelerate deployments. And then we also have a question about seismic. And of course, seismic isolation can reduce the need for site-specific designs, but maybe that's something that you're thinking about too in your designs. And I would love also to hear about your perspective on what Europe can really do to kind of compete in this global landscape. Obviously, the US-China dynamic is very critical, but there's other countries like Korea and Japan that have extraordinarily successful supply chains as well. So how does Europe fit into that global context? So let me go to you, Mads, first, and you can pick one of those.
No, but it's a key question. I mean, and it goes not only for nuclear industry, it goes for AI, it goes for a lot of other sectors that Europe need to work together and form one opinion on topics. And I think in Europe, it's no secret that France have been the instrumental country in the nuclear process. So I think if 25% of electricity in Europe is coming from nuclear, in France it's like 60%. So they have been on the forefront all along, and Macron is really pushing the agenda. And you can say that what Kiki mentioned in the beginning, the fact that Germany no longer opposing nuclear is a huge thing. So before that, they came out with that announcement a couple of months ago. They were kind of the blocking party. Now I think hopefully France can go ahead, and it's extremely important that we can compete with the US and then China/Russia. So we need to keep a common agenda, and that's also go for the regulatory frameworks, because one thing is to get a regulatory approval in Sweden, but that should be adaptable to France, to UK, etc., etc.
So we need a lot more collaboration between countries to have a much greater coherence, consensus. Actually, Sweden is providing a lot of leadership on that topic.
Yeah, exactly. I think Sweden is quite far ahead in terms. I mean, obviously, there are many nuclear nations in Europe. Sweden has been operating commercial nuclear power for 50 years. And I think on financing in particular, Sweden has been quite in the forefront. I mean, to be honest, I think it doesn't really make sense to talk about Europe as an entity when it comes to nuclear. I mean, it's a continent, and there happens to be a lot of countries there, but there is no Europe, right? There are some meetings, some of them are in Vienna, there is some SMR alliance in Brussels, but it's really individual countries. If I was a European politician and I wanted to catch up with the US, which is one country, or China, which is one country, and so on, I would try to do things more, not just collaborate, but actually try to see if things can be moved to a European level. And I think that's extremely unlikely, because nation states like to have control of their nuclear regulations and nuclear financing. But I think it's really necessary if you're going to talk about Europe as a thing. Now, we've been talking about potentially, European security postures, European security capabilities, which was unthinkable, I think, a few years back. So European strategic command and so on in the wake of US sort of exit. So I think maybe there is an opportunity now to also create some sort of European capabilities on regulation.
Yes, and if I may build on that, I think there are three things that we need, right? It's money, money, money. And we are here at an investor conference, and if you look at it, I think one, if you look at the US, this is driven by founders who have done it before, and this is what we have in the Nordics. There are fantastic entrepreneurs here, and that experience, that capital needs to go to nuclear. To hardware and to nuclear. If we look at the VC funds, in Europe today, only 20% of VC capital is going to hardware, 80% is going to software, but we need nuts and bolts to fix the energy transition and to compete. Bits and bytes are not going to solve that, so that's the second thing that needs to happen. And then at the third thing, if you look at the pension funds in Europe, we have the capital here. There's so much capital waiting to be deployed. And there, I think, if we can lock only part of that capital and invest it into deep tech, that is really, I think, what is needed to compete and to make companies like ours, but also the other deep tech companies that we need successful.
Great. So remember that list, everyone. Money, money, money. That's all we need. And actually, there's been a huge amount of capital being unlocked. The European Sustainable Finance Taxonomy does now enable financing of nuclear, albeit with some, conditions attached. The movement by Germany to stop blocking nuclear is very fundamental. The World Bank just reversed its historic ban on financing nuclear, which should provide leadership to all of the other global development banks. So really fundamental shifts, seismic shifts happening in the global capital markets that could be very important enabling opportunities for nuclear. Now, we're getting quite a few questions here about fuel. So I would love to invite our reactor developers to just speak to that for a moment. There's a question about resilience and security of supply of uranium and nuclear fuel, and then the opportunities maybe for recycling fuel,
Yes.
And then of course the sort of whole life cycle. So
Sure, yes, I can easily comment on that. So if you look at what France is doing, they're investing in the advanced reactor projects just because of this reason. They're reliant on nuclear for 70% of their electricity, and all the uranium is coming from abroad. So if they can have a solution that can make better use of that scarce source of materials, that is what they want. Because of course there's nuclear waste, but the real waste is that today we only use 5% of that ground source of uranium. And with these new technologies, we can use up to 90%. And I think that's really what needs to be done to improve resilience.
great. Jacob, did you want to add?
No, but I agree. I think that's something that's important for both our company and many of the more modern players that use, as Kiki says, I mean, it's right. If you think about it, the fact that you just use a few percentage points of the enormous power that's the uranium, it's such a waste, well, literally. So that's exactly what we also intend to do. Use this over and over so you don't need to buy as much fresh uranium in the future. Then on the other hand, Sweden's government just announced yesterday, I think, they're now actually they're allowing uranium mining again. So I think there are different things that are happening. Enrichment capabilities are being built in Europe, big investment in the UK to do more enrichment. So I mean, all parts of the value chain and supply chain is being addressed.
And Mads, you know, the availability of fuel is obviously fundamental, critical path item, and also a very long lead item. Do you consider enough investment and sort of strategic thinking and planning is happening to make sure that the fuel supply will be available when these reactors start really scaling up their deployments?
No, but you're right. So far it's concentrated on very few companies globally.
Yeah.
The supply of the fuel, and that's also why. I mean, when we go into a vendor company, I mean, one of the most critical tasks is actually to make sure that that company can be supplied with fuel. So therefore, we are also willing, with our funds, to invest in the supply chain of fuel, and either work with the existing companies or work with new companies, hopefully being established. But that's another also regulatory hard path.
Exactly. So it may be that. Oh, we've got a question about cost. Finally, wonderful. So nuclear obviously has a reputation for being very expensive and slow, and we're going to need to overcome that for nuclear actually to achieve scale and speed of deployments for these commercial applications. So please tell me that achieving really commercially attractive, irresistible costs is fundamental to your product development strategy.
Yeah, it's something that you have to include from the beginning. It needs to make strategic sense. And of course, investors that have been there on the forefront, they need to see that the things line up. Things can line up because these reactors are inherently safe. They don't need the active safety mechanisms. They can be constructed in a modular way. And in our specific case, we're targeting a levelized cost of electricity of 60 euros per megawatt hour, which is extremely competitive. So it can be done for these technologies. I think on top of that, if you look at the returns for investors and you see what's currently happening in the US, the companies there have IPO'd at multi-billion valuations even before starting construction of their first of a kind. So it's definitely possible to create a cost-competitive solution and also make investor returns.
Great.
No, but exactly, I agree. I mean, one of the reasons why nuclear has been so expensive is because it's always extremely late. And why are the projects always extremely late? Well, because giga projects are hard. There's a Danish scientist actually wrote a book called How Big Things Get Done. I'm not sure if anybody read it. It's a great book. So he looks at all giga projects, not just nuclear power plants, but like airports, terminal, Olympic villages, everything that costs more than $1 billion to make. And what would you guess? I mean, how many of these giga projects do you think are done on time and budget? Any guesses? 0, I hear there, 0, yeah. Apparently it's 8%. I'm not sure who those 8% are, but apparently there are 8%. If you add in the criteria whether they also reach the economic benefits that were anticipated, you get to 1%. So what we took from this is it's hard to build big things. That's why we, and I think Kiki, builds small things. And that by itself solves a large, I would say the majority of the cost problem.
Fantastic.
But I'd like to add in as well on the cost side. I mean, one thing is to compare the cost with other fossil fuel or with renewables. But the important thing with the nuclear is, of course, it is clean, firm power. So it's there 24/7. So a lot of industries, I mean, you need the backup having firm power. You can't really, otherwise you really need to develop the battery sector, which is not really developed yet. So that's another aspect. So even it's just par with the cost of other energy sources, then nuclear is a great winner in that context.
Now, can I just add quickly? So I fully agree with what Mats is saying. And so sometimes you say here, like, yeah, you know, renewables is so cheap. Solar is 20 euros per megawatt hour. And then I kind of think, so, I mean, if solar is so cheap, why isn't everything in Europe solar? Why do we bother with wind? Because wind is more expensive. And then you look at like onshore versus offshore, you can have the same argument. Why do we bother with offshore wind if, you know, onshore wind is so great? Because offshore is twice as expensive as onshore. And the reason is, of course, that we cannot just have solar and we cannot just have onshore wind and so on for many reasons. Land availability, you know, different regulations. So I think the easier answer is that even if nuclear was more expensive, you would still need a mix of different things because nuclear has baseload capacity and so on.
Yes.
And at these levels, nuclear is actually less expensive than offshore wind.
Okay, well, it's all about the way that these technologies go into the system and looking at the overall cost of the system. That's what we care about, as well as, of course, the very critical attributes that industrial energy users and other consumers look for in terms of reliability, security, affordability, and, of course, being clean. So we really want to congratulate you on all of your work and thank you for advancing this opportunity. And you know, we're very happy to be at this conference. Maybe this time next year, Denmark will have reversed its own opposition to nuclear energy, which would be wonderful. So hopefully we'll see you all next year. Maybe give us a report back on all of that progress. In the meantime, please join me in thanking our wonderful panel. Thank you.